Welcome to the channel. That's my best vampire impression, okay? In today's video, I will be discussing Stephen King's second published novel, Salem's Lot. This came out in 1975. It is the second time I've read this story, actually. I read it several years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but probably around 10 years ago, I guess. Really enjoyed it back then. So I'm on this Stephen King journey where I'm going through his works in chronological order. So I'm up to book 2. Yay. So we're making some progress already, sort of. Anyway, so I'm sure a lot of people know what this story is about. There will be spoilers throughout this video. I will try to give you some kind of warning before just jumping right into it. But I will be going over the characters, what happens in the story, and there will be 5 trivia questions sprinkled throughout the video. I tried to make these questions a little bit easier than the Carrie video, but at any rate, I will be discussing spoilers. I will talk about the ending. I will talk about all the things. So if you have not read this book and you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to skip this video. So this is the edition I picked up most recently at Books A Million. I like that cover. I also have a mass market paperback of Salem's Lot. This is the one I originally read several years ago. But yeah, we're going to talk about A Salem's Lot. Now this is Stephen King's first town story, I guess you could say. There are multiple characters in this book. There are only 6 main characters that we care about, okay? But there are 2 antagonists, there's 1 protagonist, there's 5 main side characters, and there are a slew of other characters in this story. I'll talk about a little bit of them. But I actually read this story back in June. It took me a little over a week. I've been trying to wait on my shirt to come in. I ordered a Salem's Lot t-shirt off of Dark Regions Press. It was a pre-order. Unfortunately, that is not arriving in time for this video, so I had to put on a little Halloween shirt, and it says "Freak in the Sheets," in case you didn't see that. But anyway, I wanted to go ahead and do this video because I'm filming these videos ahead of schedule. I'm trying to get out in front of the videos, so that way after I read a book, I'll do a video, schedule it a little farther into the future. So I couldn't wait any longer on that t-shirt just for this video. I'm sure I will wear it in a future video. Maybe I'll get to wear it in my night shift video. There is a sequel or a prequel, I think it's a prequel, in that collection for Salem's Lot, so be on the lookout for that. So let's start with the characters. Our main character is Ben Mears. He's a 32-year-old, I believe, author who is returning to Jerusalem's Lot in order to write his next story. He arrives in town on September 5th, 1975, and the whole book takes place over the course of just over a month. So I think the last day that everything happens is October 6th or 7th. And he's interested in renting the Marston house, which is this creepy old house that sits up on a hill and overlooks the town, and it has a reputation of kind of being haunted, being an evil place. Several years ago, I think it was a mob boss moved in. His name was Hubert Marston, and his wife Bertie, and they were into some really bad things, let's just say that. So he goes and talks to the local realtor. His name was Larry Crockett. And Larry informs Ben that the house has already been sold. So since the house is no longer available to rent, he is going to go stay at Eva Miller's boarding house, which is called Eva's Rooms. And so there are like 5 or 6 other people that are staying there. They're all older. And Ben takes like the attic somewhere up top where he can see the Marston house really well. So then we meet Susan Norton, and she is a 25, 26-year-old girl still living at home. She meets Ben in the park, and she recognizes him from his author photo on the book she's reading. And it was a library copy. She gets him to sign it. So they immediately strike up a conversation and have an immediate connection. And so they go on a semi-little date to a cafe or somewhere to chit-chat some more. And that's when we start meeting some other town folk. But before we get into the town folk, let's talk about the town name. So Jerusalem's Lot is an odd name for a town, and it has a little backstory. So when we get introduced to the town, we get to learn where the town name came from. So that is your first question. What animal is the town named after? The answer, a pig, of all things. So back in the 1700s, 1800s, whenever it was, there was this farmer and one of his mean pigs got loose and ran off into the woods, and that's basically where the name came from. Because the pig's name was Jerusalem, she ran off into the lot, so Jerusalem's Lot. So Stephen King is famous for these big, huge stories centered around a small town. And like I said earlier, this is the first story in which that takes place. I mean, Carrie took place in a small town, but it was not on this level. So after Ben and Susan go off on their little semi-date, we meet Parkins Gillespie and his deputy, Nolly Gardner. And they're like, isn't that Susan Norton going off with that writer? Because, you know, small towns, everybody knows who Ben is, like within seconds, it seems like. So we get introduced to the sheriff and the deputy, and then we get introduced to people at Ava's house, including Ava. And we get introduced to so many people, like Larry Crockett's daughter Ruthie, and Dud Rogers, who works at the local dump. There were so many, I had to write some names down. So this is my little, I guess you could say, sort of a reading journal. I'm just taking notes. But other people in the town are Danny and Ralphie Glick, Larry Crockett, like I said, Dud Rogers, Mike Ryerson, and Royal Snow. Now these two are some guys that do a lot of manual stuff around town, and they end up getting suckered into going and picking up the new guy's mysterious packages off the dock. And the new guy is Richard Straker, and he has come to town to open an antique store with his secret silent partner, whatever, Kurt Barlow. And Kurt Barlow is MIA, and supposedly he's out of town buying some more stuff in New York, I think it was. But we all know, or you should know, that these are the two antagonists. Kurt Barlow's the main vampire, and Richard Straker is like his familiar. But other characters, we have Floyd Tibbetts, and Ed Weasel Craig, and Jimmy Cody, and Matt Burke, Father Donald Callahan, Mark Petrie, and there are a few other names. I didn't even write those down, but there are some trigger warnings in this story. Let me say that before I forget. There are several gay slurs used in this story, which apparently is a trigger for me because I was very put off by it. But the F word is said several times. There's references to sissy boys and stuff like that. So if that's a trigger for you, definitely be aware of that. It happens a lot in the front of the story, but I have to remember that this is not Stephen King technically thinking these things. These are things that still happen today. People still call gay people this stuff, unfortunately. But there's also trigger warnings for child abuse, child and dog death, mention of rape. I mean, there are several different trigger warnings in this story. Just putting that out there if you care about that stuff. Apparently, I care about it a little bit now because it's hard to read that stuff, especially nowadays, and not take offense to it. But I just got to remember, it's just a story. That's basically what small town people think, even to this day, I'm sure. So that is just part of it. It's part of reality, and unfortunately, that is the reality that we still live in. So I tried not to hold it against it. So Ben talks to Susan a little bit about his past. He grew up in Salem's Lot, sort of. He spent time there as a child for 4 years, I think it was, with his Aunt Cynthia. But it's the only place he's ever felt like home. And so that's why he came back to Jerusalem's Lot to write this story about the Marston House. Well, the Marston House is where Richard Straker and Kurt Barlow are going to take up residence. And it gave me some Hell House by Richard Matheson impressions, because I know Stephen King is a big fan of Richard Matheson. And so it's like Dracula meets Hell House meets, I don't know, some other small town thing. So that brings us to question 2. So as a small kid, when Ben lived in Jerusalem's Lot, he was dared to go into the Marsden house and take an item. So question 2 is, what item did Ben retrieve from the Marsden house? The answer, a snow globe. So he got in there pretty quick and got the snow globe, but he wanted to go upstairs and check out where Hubie Marsden hanged himself. And so he goes up there and he sees him still hanging there, even though it's been several years since that has happened. And it freaks him out. It traumatized him as a child, and it still traumatizes him to this day. Throughout the whole story, Ben is meeting the different townsfolk. He is striking up a sort of dating relationship with Susan. He soon meets teacher Matt Burke, who becomes kind of friends with him. And Matt is friends with his Dr. James Jimmy Cody. And so Ben meets all these people and things are going great. It takes a while for things to get going because we are being introduced to so many people. So we have to take our time to get to know these people. And that's really great because the more you like a character, the more invested in the story you become. So I think it's great that Stephen King takes us the long way around to get to the center of the story. So Ben's meeting all these people and he finds out a little bit more about the town. There was this big fire back in the day that destroyed a lot of the town, and it's referenced several times throughout the story. So that is question 3. In what year did the Great Fire happen? The answer, 1951. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere in this story that the fire was set on purpose by a teenager, but I can't recall exactly the details of all that. It is mentioned several times throughout the story, but it doesn't really play a significant part. Not really. So the fire wiped out some things, mainly forest areas, I guess. I don't think anybody lost their business or their home. So later on in that day, I believe it was the same day, Mike Ryerson is making his rounds and going to, I think it was Harmony Hills Cemetery, which is across from the Marsden house. And somebody has murdered a dog and hung it up on, like impaled it on the iron fence, you know, and it's just, it was very gruesome. But there are some very creepy moments in this story too, like when Danny and Ralphie Glick are walking through the woods to try to get to Mark Petrie's house. That's when the first real terror strikes. So that is when Ralphie and Danny both disappear. Danny reemerges a few hours later, is taken to the hospital where he ultimately dies. So question 4, which resident is the first to be turned into a vampire? If you guessed Ralphie Glick, I'm sorry, you're wrong. It's actually Danny Glick. So this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler for those, but I don't think it's going to ruin anything. So Ralphie was the first one to be abducted, but he was actually the sacrifice to bring Barlow into town. And Danny was the first one to actually be turned into a vampire because Ralphie's never seen again. Danny becomes the menacing little vampire going around town at night, knocking on windows.
Invite me in.
And so things take off from there. So after Danny dies, Mike Ryerson is about to fill up the grave. This is after the ceremony and everything. And he gets this feeling like he's being watched. And it seems like it's coming from the coffin that's about to be covered in dirt. And so he starts to like wig out a little bit, and he jumps down into the grave and he pries open the coffin. And next time we see Mike, he is not looking very well. And that's when Matt Burke invites him to stay the night at his house because he's either drunk or he's not well. Either way, he doesn't want him to drive, so Matt takes him back to his place. But later that night, Matt hears some tapping on the window in the guest room, and he kind of hears voices coming from there. And he hears a laugh, and it's a child's laugh. And it freaks him out so bad, so he calls Ben over to kind of help him go investigate. And so they get into Mike Ryerson's room, and Mike is dead. So this continues on and on. There's so much to tell you that it would take quite a while to go through each plot point of the story. But from there, we go on to more townsfolk disappearing, being turned into vampires. Our core group of 6 is starting to realize what is happening, but Susan is totally not able to accept that there are vampires in the world. She cannot accept that. So she decides to go up to the Marston house on her own. She runs into Mark, and they both, at this point, want to eliminate the vampire if he's real, but Susan really doesn't think he is, and it just goes on and on. So from this point on, there will be spoilers for the ending. So if you don't want to know the ending, tune out now. If you've already read the book, then stick around. This is nothing new for you. If you just want a refresher, stick around. But if you are leaving at this point, I will say that I love this story. I gave it 5 stars. And like I said, it is my second time reading it. I don't know if I like it better than Carrie. I'll have to let it stew in my brain for a long time before I decide that. Okay, so spoiler talk from here on out, okay guys? So Susan and Mark are captured in the Marston house. Mark is taken upstairs and basically hogtied by Straker, and Straker sends Susan into the basement to await Barlow's arising. But Mark somehow is able to escape his ropes and kills Straker. Mark is like a 12-year-old kid, and he has really got his stuff together. He tries to go down and save Susan, but as soon as Susan says she can't see, it's too dark, and that's when she screams, and it's too late for Susan. So we're left with 5 main characters. Father Callahan is slow to believe, but ultimately does, and anytime there's holy water present around a vampire in this story, the object glows. So like a cross dipped in holy water will glow, an axe sprinkled with holy water will glow, skin, whatever. So I thought that was a really cool element. So Father Callahan faces Barlow when Barlow has Mark by the throat after he kills Mark's mom, and basically Barlow lets Mark go. If Father Callahan tosses his cross, Mark escapes. Father Callahan is forced to drink Barlow's blood, I guess to become the new Straker, the new familiar. So Father Callahan tries to go back to his church and is unable to enter. He receives a bad shock when he tries to open the door. So he's like very defeated, and he just hightails it out of town, and we never see him again. So earlier in the story, Matt Burke has a heart attack when he and Susan are downstairs talking, and he goes upstairs when he hears somebody upstairs, and it ends up being Mike Ryerson, who is dead. He died in that room the night before, and it freaked Matt out so bad he revoked his invitation. Mike is forced out of the house. Matt has a heart attack. He ends up in the hospital, and he ends up having another heart attack while Susan and Mark are at the Marston house, and James, Cody, and Ben Mears are at a funeral house trying to decide if Marjorie Glick is going to come back from the dead or not. Spoiler alert, she does. But Matt ends up having a heart attack. Jimmy Cody, he goes to the Marston house with Mark, and he tries to go down into the basement to see if Barlow's down there, but like the stairwell is rigged, and he ends up falling and impaling himself on some knives, and that's the end of Jimmy. So we have Ben and Mark left, and they are the ones to figure out where Barlow is hiding, because it's no longer at the Marston house. So that is your final question. Where does the final showdown take place? The answer? Eva Miller's boarding room, aka Eva's rooms, aka Eva's basement. All those answers are correct. So they find a hidden door behind a chest, and it's locked, and so that's when Ben dips his axe in holy water, and he's banging the lock, and he opens the door, and they drag Barlow's casket out into the main room where the sunlight is, and leaving Eva Miller and all the other vampires asleep in that little area of the basement. They open the lid, and Barlow hypnotizes Mark into fighting Ben in order to stop him from staking him. And so Ben knocks Mark out and stakes Barlow. And that is basically the end. Unfortunately, all those that have been turned were not turned back because of Barlow's death. So Ben and Mark decide to hightail it out of town, and that's where we find them at the beginning of the story. Is like it's some months later, maybe a year later, I don't remember exactly, but I think the two of them are in Mexico, and that's how the story starts. Everybody thinks they're father and son, but ultimately they do decide to go back to Jerusalem's lot to burn it down. I guess that's why the Great Fire of 1951 kept reoccurring in conversation, because at the end of the story, Jerusalem's lot is about to go up in flames. Overall, it was a fantastic story. I really enjoyed it. I didn't get bored throughout any of it. There was one plot hole that I found that I would like an answer to, and if you know, let me know. So there is this family called the McDougalls, and it's Sandy and Roy, or Royce, and baby Randy. Well, baby Randy is the one being abused by his mother, and at some point Danny Glick is able to get in and change the baby. But how? Because he was not invited into the McDougal home. He never had a conversation with Sandy or Roy, and obviously a baby can't invite you in. So that is one plot hole that I know I would like an answer to, but it was very small, a minute detail, and I guess it didn't really matter all that much, but it's still a plot hole nonetheless, Stephen King. So that is Salem's Lot. I really enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, I don't know if I like it better than Carrie, but it is a really great vampire story. So how many questions did you get right? Did you get all 5 questions right? I would love to know that. Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you've read this, what you thought about it, if you want to read it, if you watched the whole video, if you still want to read it, even if you were spoiled in this video, which I think you should, because it's a really great story. So that is 2 books down in my 80 book journey for reading Stephen King. Whew. I've got a long way to go, and I've been slacking this year so bad. I'm going to have to try to speed things up. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe at night out there. Don't be answering any knocks on the windows, and I'll see you in the next one.